What would you do if you woke up and the entire missile arsenal of a country your military has been studying for 30 years was suddenly gone? Think about that for a second, because that is the question the world is quietly sitting with right now. In the last few hours, reporting suggests the United States Army, working alongside Air Force and Navy strike assets, executed what could be the most comprehensive precision strike campaign ever carried out against Iran's ballistic missile program in a single night. If even half of what is being reported is true, something fundamental just shifted in the Middle East. Quietly, while most people slept, the balance of power may have been rewritten forever. Quick favor before we go deeper. If this channel has ever helped you understand something the news headlines could not, take a second and hit that subscribe button and turn the notifications on. This story is going to move fast in the coming days, and you do not want to miss what comes next. Now, let me walk you through what we know, what is still unclear, and why this moment is bigger than any single strike. For most of my life, I've studied, taught, and written about air power, deterrence, and the strange, slow chess game that runs underneath every modern conflict. I've spent years inside military classrooms and operational planning discussions, breaking down the kind of targeting problems that most people never think about, but every pilot, intelligence officer, and combat planner thinks about constantly. And I can tell you with some confidence that what is being described overnight is not a routine operation. This is something almost no one thought was even possible 10 years. Here you go. Let me start with what we are actually talking about, because context is everything here. Iran did not become a missile superpower by accident. It became one because Iran looked across the map, looked at the United States Navy aircraft carriers sailing past its coastline, looked at the Israeli Air Force with its fifth-generation fighters, looked at $600 billion of American military technology, and made a brutally honest decision. It cannot win a conventional war against any of these forces, not in the air, not at sea, not on the ground. So instead, Iran chose a totally different kind of weapon, a weapon that does not need a fleet, a weapon that does not need an air force, a weapon that does not even need to find the enemy in order to threaten it. That weapon is the ballistic missile. For 40 years, Iran poured billions of dollars into a single doctrine, the doctrine of standoff strike. Build rockets, bury them deep, hide them well, scatter them across an entire country. And then, when the moment comes, fire them at cities, at bases, at aircraft carriers, at anyone who tried to take a swing. Rockets, bury them deep, hide them well, scatter them across an entire country. And then, when the moment comes, fire them at cities, at bases, at aircraft carriers, at anyone who tried to take a swing. At the Iranian regime, the result was an arsenal that scared every strategist in Washington and Tel Aviv. Short-range missiles, medium-range missiles, missiles with names that sounded almost poetic in Farsi, the Shahab, the Imad, the Khorramshahr, the Sajil. Each one designed for a different target, each one carrying a different warhead, each one pointing at a different city, and underneath all of them sat something even more remarkable. Iran built what its own commanders called missile cities, massive underground facilities, bored hundreds of meters into the sides of mountains, sealed with reinforced blast doors, fed by redundant command and control networks, and protected by an integrated air defense system that grew more sophisticated every single year. These were not just missile warehouses, they were fortresses. They were the physical embodiment of an entire national strategy. The whole point of this architecture was to take a hit and still fight back, to absorb a first strike, survive it, and then deliver a punishing retaliatory blow. That promise, the promise of retaliation, was the foundation of Iranian deterrence for an entire generation. And that is what made neutralizing this program so extraordinarily difficult. You see, when military planners sit down to destroy a fixed target like a building or a bridge, the math is relatively simple. You identify the coordinates, you choose the right weapon, you launch it, you confirm the hit, done. But Iran's program was deliberately designed to make that math nearly impossible. The missiles moved, the launchers hid under camouflage netting, the production facilities sat behind dozens of meters of rock, the storage depots were duplicated and dispersed across the country. Some weapons sat on mobile launchers that could fire from any empty stretch of desert and disappear within minutes. Others sat deep inside tunnels that no conventional bomb could reach without the right fuse, the right angle of attack, and the right penetration characteristics. To put it simply, Iran took the targeting problem America had wrestled with for 30 years and turned it into an engineering masterpiece. Every assumption Western planners had relied on, every pattern they had studied, every trick they had used against Iraq or Serbia or Syria, Iran had watched, learned, and built defenses against. For decades, the conventional wisdom inside the Pentagon was clear. You cannot completely destroy a determined nation's ballistic missile program through military force. You can disrupt it, you can degrade it, you can delay it, but you cannot eliminate it, not through strikes alone. That assumption held with quiet confidence for an entire generation, is what makes the reporting from the last few hours so shocking. Because according to multiple credible outlets, what the United States just pulled off overnight was not a limited strike. It was not a symbolic gesture. It was a synchronized, multi-domain operation that hit missile cities, mobile launchers, production lines, storage depots, command nodes, and air defense batteries all at once, across an entire country's geography. That word, simultaneously, is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence, and I want you to really feel what it means. Simultaneous strikes across a country as large and as rugged as Iran is one of the most logistically demanding operations any military on Earth can attempt. It requires precision timing down to the minute. It requires real-time intelligence flowing continuously into aircraft cockpits, surface launchers, and command centers hundreds of miles apart. It requires weapons arriving on target inside overlapping windows, so that no individual strike package leaves a gap for the enemy to respond. And it requires trust, deep institutional trust, between the Army, the Air Force, the Navy, the Marines, and the intelligence community that every single piece of this enormous puzzle will execute exactly as planned. This is not something you improvise. This is something you rehearse for months, sometimes years. And now let me talk about some of the specific weapons that the reporting suggests were used, because I think this is where the story gets really interesting from a doctrinal standpoint. The weapon everyone is talking about, and the reason the story matters far beyond the Middle East, is called the Precision Strike Missile, or PrSM. For most of the post-Cold War era, the U.S. Army was not really built to participate in theater-level strike campaigns. When Americans imagined a global bomber hitting distant targets, they pictured B-2 Spirits, B-1 Lancers, F-35s launching from carriers. The Army was supposed to fight on the ground close to the front line, supporting maneuver units. That was the older mental model. PrSM changes that model forever. It is a next-generation precision weapon designed from the ground up to hit deep, hardened, time-sensitive targets from land-based launchers. It flies faster, it flies farther, and it strikes with an accuracy that would have been unthinkable when I first started studying weapons. Effects. If the reporting is accurate that battalions of these missiles were fired overnight, what you are looking at is not just a tactical success. What you are looking at is the first large-scale combat proof that the Army can now punch alongside the Air Force and the Navy, deep into contested territory, against the hardest targets on the battlefield. That is a doctrinal earthquake in slow motion, and it will reshape American defense planning for decades. But weapons alone do not solve the missile problem. The intelligence layer is just as important, and frankly, just as hard. Hitting a fixed building is one thing. Hitting a mobile launcher that moves every few hours, hides under camouflage netting, and may be parked in a different empty stretch of desert by the time your weapon arrives, that is a category of problem entirely on its own. The United States has spent 20 years building what intelligence professionals call a fused targeting picture. That is a fancy phrase, but what it really means is this: satellites overhead, drones overhead, signals intelligence listening from 100 different directions, cyber tools probing enemy networks, human sources on the ground, and all of that information flowing into a single shared picture, updated in near real time, that can tell a shooter with reasonable confidence, here's the missile launcher, here's where it is right now, here's the window you have to hit it. When that fused picture really works, the kill chain, the time between finding a target and destroying it, can collapse from hours down to minutes, and that is the difference between missing the launcher and killing the launcher. Iran's mobile missile force spent decades training to defeat exactly this picture. They rotated constantly. They moved at night. They hid in tunnels. They hid under trees. They hid among civilian vehicles. They built decoys. They built spares. They rehearsed survival drills the way elite athletes rehearse game plans. And yet, if the initial reporting holds up, U.S. intelligence appears to have solved the problem in a single operation. That should make every planner in every competing military think tank stop and think very carefully. Because if the United States can do this to Iran's missile force, the targeting math that every other nation on Earth has been quietly relying on, including North Korea's, including China's, including Russia's, just got rewritten overnight. There's one more technical piece I want to walk you through, because without it, the operation does not make sense at all. Before you can hit a missile site, you have to deal with what is protecting the missile site. Iran's air defense network is not a joke. It is layered. It is modern. It includes Russian origin systems that were specifically designed to shoot down exactly the kind of aircraft the United States was about to send in. It includes indigenous Iranian systems that have been improved year after year. It includes shorter range point defenses, longer range interceptors, radar arrays buried into mountains, command centers hardened against signal jamming, and electronic warfare tools designed to blind American targeting pods. Any Honest assessment of how the United States got its strike packages through that network involves using what militaries call SEAD, the suppression of enemy air defenses. That includes anti-radiation missiles that hunt radar emissions. That includes electronic warfare platforms that jam and spoof. That includes cyber tools that may have temporarily blinded Iranian command and control. And very possibly, that includes strikes on the air defense nodes themselves, hours before the main package arrived, sent in by stealth platforms flying below the radar horizon. This is choreography, and it is the part of the story we may not fully understand for weeks or months because the cyber and electronic warfare pieces are deliberately hidden. But the fact that the main strike package appears to have arrived, hit its targets, and returned with the success being reported tells you one thing with certainty. The air defense problem got solved somehow, and it got solved well enough to allow the rest of the operation to proceed. That alone is a major story, because Iran's air defense network was supposed to be one of the most sophisticated in the region. If it failed to protect the missile program, then every nation that has been investing in similar defenses has to ask itself some very uncomfortable questions about the value of those defenses in a real war. Now, let me move from the tactical layer to the strategic layer, because this is where the story stops being about missiles and starts being about the future of the Middle East. Iran's missile program was never just a military capability, it was the entire spine of Iranian regional strategy. Every proxy force, every partner militia, every piece of coercion Iran has exercised from Beirut to Baghdad to Sana'a to the Gulf shipping lanes, all of it was downstream from the promise that if you struck the Iranian homeland, Iran could strike back. That promise was the bedrock. Remove the bedrock, and the entire structure above it begins to settle. Think about Hezbollah's rocket arsenal in Lebanon. That arsenal was directly linked to Iranian production lines, Iranian technical advisors, and the assumption that a serious attack on Iran would unleash a punishing Iranian retaliation. Strip away that assumption, and Hezbollah's strategic value begins to look very different to its backers in Tehran. Think about the Houthi missile and drone campaign in Yemen. That campaign has disrupted global shipping, threatened Saudi infrastructure, and drawn American and British warships into months of high-risk operations in the Red Sea. Almost every sophisticated weapon the Houthis fired came from Tehran. If the production capacity behind those weapons has been seriously damaged, the calculus in Sana'a changes overnight. And so does the calculus in Riyadh, in Abu Dhabi, in Cairo. Think about Iraq. Iranian-aligned militia groups have launched hundreds of attacks on U.S. personnel and bases inside Iraqi territory. Those attacks have happened in the shadow of an Iranian promise that a serious escalation in Iraq would trigger consequences in Tehran. But if Tehran's retaliatory toolkit has just been diminished, those militias lose a great deal of the protection they thought they had been operating under. And think about Israel, because this is where the emotional weight of the story hits hardest. The Israeli population has lived through multiple Iranian missile salvos over the past 2 years. Real sirens, real shelter drills, real casualties, real psychological strain on an entire society. The cost of defending against those salvos, in interceptor missiles, in air defense readiness, in diverted military resources, in civilian anxiety, has been enormous and very real. If the source of those salvos has been seriously degraded overnight, Israel's strategic breathing room expands in ways that are hard to measure and hard to overstate. This is the chain reaction. A single strike campaign executed inside a single night, sending doctrinal shockwaves across an entire region and arguably across the entire study of deterrence itself. Before we go any further, a small request that genuinely helps this channel grow. If this analysis gave you something you have not heard from cable news, click the share button and send this video to one friend who follows these stories. The signal from a real human share helps this video reach people who need it but have not yet found it. Now, let me slow down and give you some caveats, because intellectual honesty is non-negotiable on this channel. What we know right now is still developing. The first 12 to 24 hours of reporting after any major military operation are almost always a mixture of confirmed reality, battlefield confusion, psychological pressure from both sides, and genuine uncertainty. That is not a criticism. That is just the fog of war. The headline damage numbers you're seeing right now, the percentage of launchers destroyed, the percentage of production lines hit, the totals being repeated on television loops, those numbers will almost certainly shift over the next 2 weeks as more sophisticated battle. Damage assessment comes in. Some targets that look destroyed in satellite imagery may turn out to be partially damaged. Other targets that look intact may turn out to be functionally unusable. Decoys, backups, mobile reserves, all of that lives in the margin of error. So when I tell you this operation appears historic, I want you to hear the qualifier. It appears historic. If the battle damage assessment confirms even a substantial portion of the early reporting, then yes, this is a generational moment. But we do not have that confirmation yet, and any responsible analyst will tell you we should wait for the numbers to settle before declaring a final verdict. What I am willing to say with more confidence is something more important than the specific numbers. What I am willing to say is this. The strategic assumption that undergirded Iranian deterrence for 40 years, the assumption that a determined adversary can build a ballistic missile program, so dispersed, so hardened, and so deeply buried that no modern strike campaign can fundamentally dismantle it, that assumption is now under serious pressure. And even if the actual damage is half of what the early reports suggest, the demonstration effect alone will be enormous. Because here is what most casual observers do not fully appreciate. The point of an operation like this is not just what gets destroyed on the night it happens. The point is also what other potential adversaries around the world now believe is possible. Every military planner in every contested region is studying this campaign right now. Beijing is studying it. Pyongyang is studying it. Moscow is studying it. And every one of them is asking the same question. If the United States can do this to Iran's missile force, what could it do to ours? That question is the deepest strategic impact of this operation, and it is going to ripple through global military planning for many years. Let me also talk briefly about Iran, the actual human side of this story, because that is too often lost when we talk about precision targeting. Iran is not just a flag on a map. Iran is 90 million people. Iran is a country with a young, frustrated, ambitious population that has been living under sanctions, under restricted internet, under inflation and unemployment, and constant geopolitical tension for as long as many of them can remember. Many Iranians want a different future. Many Iranians are watching what just happened tonight and wondering quietly whether the regime they live under is finally losing its grip on the only thing that gave it real power, the credible threat of retaliation. The internal political consequences inside Iran are going to be enormous. The regime has built an enormous amount of its legitimacy around the narrative of strategic strength. We are strong. We can hurt anyone who tries to hurt us. That narrative just took a direct hit. And the most dangerous days for a regime whose narrative is collapsing are not the days when its enemies celebrate. The most dangerous days are the days when its own population starts asking different questions in private kitchens and whispered phone calls. How Iran's leadership chooses to handle that pressure, with aggressive retaliation designed to restore credibility, with calibrated restraint designed to buy time, or with escalation through proxies designed to demonstrate residual power, is the question that will define the next several weeks. What I can tell you is that each of those options has serious costs. Aggressive retaliation risks drawing additional strikes. Proxy escalation risks exposing the limits of remaining capability. And inactivity risks the slow erosion of internal legitimacy. Iran is in a difficult place, and the next few weeks are going to be tense. One more thing before I close. I want to acknowledge the real human beings who flew, sailed, planned, and executed this operation. The pilots who flew into heavily defended airspace knowing they could be shot down. The intelligence analysts who built the targeting picture that made the strikes possible. The army crews who launched land-based precision weapons deep into contested territory for the first time at scale. The commanders who coordinated multiple services across multiple domains in real time. The maintenance crews and the communicators and the logisticians who made the whole thing function on a single, unforgiving night. War is not a video game. It is not a clean chart with neat arrows on a slide. It is thousands of human beings working in the dark, making decisions in seconds, holding each other's lives in their hands, executing something that took years to plan and that never quite goes the way the briefing said it would. The fact that this operation appears to have succeeded is the result of that human effort, and it deserves to be named. So whatever you think about the politics, whatever you think about the legal framework, whatever you think about the long arc of American foreign policy, please hold on to one thing. Behind every precision weapon, there's a person who launched it. Behind every satellite image, there is an analyst who studied it. Behind every plan, there's a team who rehearsed it. Real people, real families waiting at home, real courage in the dark. Now I want to step back and put everything you have just heard into a single frame, because the story is bigger than the strike itself. The history of trying to destroy a nation's ballistic missile program through military force is, frankly, not full of success stories. The most famous example is the Scud Hunt during the Gulf War in 1991, an enormous effort with enormous resources, and an effort that ultimately suppressed but never fully destroyed Iraq's mobile missile force. Every major study since then has pointed to the same conclusion. Mobile, dispersed, hardened missile systems are extraordinarily hard to neutralize completely. That has been the consensus view inside every defense ministry on Earth for the past 3 decades. What is being described tonight breaks that consensus. Not by a little, by a lot. The combination of mature multi-source intelligence fusion, next-generation precision weapons capable of penetrating hardened underground facilities, multi-domain synchronization that denied Iran the time to react, and an air defense suppression operation that appears to have worked, all of that represents a doctrinal capability that simply did not exist a decade ago. If the early reporting holds up under scrutiny, and I want you to remember that qualifier again, then the United States military has just solved a targeting problem that the rest of the world considered unsolvable. And that is a story that will be debated in war colleges from Washington to Beijing for the next 20 years. Let me also talk briefly about what this means for you, the person watching this video, because most military analysis stops inside the bubble of professionals and never really tells the average citizen what actually changed for them. Here's what changed. The risk of an Iranian missile landing on a U.S. base in the Gulf just dropped. The risk of an Iranian missile hitting Tel Aviv just dropped. The risk of an Iranian missile hitting Riyadh just dropped. The risk of a Houthi missile, fueled by Iranian production lines, hitting a commercial ship in the Red Sea just dropped. And the implicit protection that Iranian-aligned militias thought they were operating under inside Iraq and Syria just became a great deal less credible. For ordinary people in those regions, that is not an abstract shift. That is the difference between shelter drills and quiet nights. That is the difference between closed airspace and open airports. That is the difference between insurance premiums that reflect an active missile threat and premiums that reflect a calmer strategic environment. The world you woke up in yesterday is not the world you are living in right now. And most people do not yet understand just how deep that change actually goes. Before we land this, one last thing. The story I have just told you is going to be twisted, simplified, and weaponized in the days ahead. Politicians will claim credit, pundits will claim they predicted it, critics will claim it was reckless, supporters will claim it was overdue, and somewhere in the middle, the actual truth will be quieter, more complicated, and more important than any of those narratives. Do not let anyone flatten this for you. This was a real military operation executed by real people, requiring real courage, producing real consequences. It deserves serious analysis, not slogans. It deserves curiosity, not certainty. And it deserves your patience as the full picture emerges over the coming weeks. If you have stayed with me through this entire breakdown, I want to thank you. Not with words, but with a small private ask. Leave a comment below telling me what you think the most important consequence of this operation will be. The regional shift, the proxy networks, the doctrinal lessons, or the long-term deterrence math, and then come back and read the other comments in a week. The conversation in this comment section is going to be one of the most interesting real-time analyses unfolding anywhere online as more information comes out. And if this video helped you see something the headlines could not, share it with one friend who takes these stories seriously. That single share is the most powerful signal you can send. It tells the algorithm and it tells the people behind this channel that this kind of slow, careful, honest analysis is worth making. So where does that leave us? It leaves us in a moment that is bigger than any single night, bigger than any single strike package, and bigger than any single missile that was destroyed or that slipped through. It leaves us at the beginning of a new strategic chapter. A chapter whose first pages are still being written in real time, and whose later pages will be debated for decades in classrooms, in war games, in intelligence briefings, and in the quiet kitchens of Iranian families who are watching their government lose the only thing that made it feel safe. Iran's missile program was not just a weapon, it was a promise. And the world just watched that promise break. History will remember this night. Make sure you remember it too. I will see you in the next one.